This was the scene today in one of those newly liberated towns, one that was liberated from Russian occupation. More bodies were exhumed from a mass grave in Izum. Ukrainian officials say they have recovered 146 bodies so far, including many civilians and including children. Some bodies show evidence of torture and execution. And this one site may contain more than 400 victims. But the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, today called the whole thing a lie. Now, Ukraine is painstakingly gathering evidence from Izum and other cities in the hopes they can one day prove in court that the atrocities committed by the Russians are very much real. Meanwhile, the downstream collateral effects of the war across Europe and the globe are only deepening. And they don't look to be going anywhere soon, particularly the destabilization of food and energy supplies. When it comes to the human toll of those ripple effects from the war, the person at the forefront of the U.S. government's response is Samantha Power. As the head of USAID, the country's agency for international development, in recent weeks, Administrator Power has been traveling from crisis point to crisis point around the world to places where a combination of natural and political disasters have wrecked infrastructure and caused dangerous food insecurity. And all of it is aggravated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, not to mention climate change. And Samantha Power brings to this role a very particular history. She served in the Obama administration on the National Security Council and then as Obama's ambassador to the United Nations. But even before that, she was widely recognized as one of the world's experts on war crimes and genocide and bringing the perpetrators of those kinds of atrocities to justice. And at this precarious moment for Ukraine and the world, Samantha Power is here in New York, where world leaders are gathering for the UN General Assembly. And I am very pleased to say she joins me in studio now. Samantha Power, USAID Administrator. Madam Administrator Samantha Power, my friend, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming on set. It is I'm going to say, sort of terrifying time in the world. And I want to first start with Ukraine and those images of the digging up of graves in Izum, the atrocities that look to have been committed there. Do you think, and this is as someone who has written the book on this and who understands this issue in a deeply emotionally granular way, do you think there is a chance that Putin will be held accountable for this? Or anybody will be held accountable, I should say?
It's a great question. And certainly those images, those lives cry out for accountability now from the grave. I'd say that this was the biggest worry all along with this conflict, is that you would combine a capacity for atrocities that Putin had already shown himself capable of in places like Aleppo, teaming up with the Assad regime or backing Assad as he gassed people to death, with the military prowess of a superpower.
Yeah.
And when you see the lines being pushed back, and every time they are pushed back, what is unearthed, no pun intended, you see the stakes of this conflict. And in terms of the accountability question, all I can speak to is from my own experience being in Bosnia, where, again, you had similar atrocities, mass graves, targeted attacks, use of sexual violence, the killing of children, along with elderly men and women. And the perpetrators just strutted around with that sense of impunity that you see in the territories that Russian forces have occupied, and you have seen in Crimea and in Donbass since 2014. And it was Milosevic, these names now, became kind of iconic, associated with war crimes, Mladic, Karadzic, and they were so smug and they were so sure. And all the international community could do and did, led by the U.S., is document the war crimes, painstakingly interview the survivors. Those scenes that we see in Izum today and in Bucha not long ago, those are the same scenes we saw play out. And people wondered, will it ever go to any constructive use? But even as in recent weeks, when you hear grumblings of discontent in Moscow, you start to imagine a scenario where at some point, there'll be different leadership in Russia. I mean, just by definition, the actuarial tables are such that will happen at some point, no matter what. And so life is long. Certainly the sanctions, the export controls, all of those other punishments that have been put in place, accountability becomes part and parcel to any scenario, even after a peace agreement, where those things get re-examined or loosened. And so the incentive structure changes over time, and it's up to the United States and other countries to stick together and to continue to not only document and put yourself in a position to hold people accountable, but see the International Criminal Court process through, see the UN Human Rights Council process through, support the OSCE, support, we at USAID support Ukrainian NGOs on the ground who are now, they've set up 22 offices across the country, just painstakingly documenting case after case. And there are 15,000 incidents of war crimes that have been documented so far.
Yeah, I think Ukraine's top prosecutor said they've identified 34,000 potential war crimes, which is just a staggering number. And I think that, I mean, that number alone can, I think, cause some people to be defeatist. I know you're hopeful that you won't, you're pragmatic as well. Time marches forward, regimes change. But I wonder how much you think disinformation and the current Russian posture is a different calculation than, you know, the sort of posture of genocidal leaders in the late 90s, right? We are living in a time where the Russians can literally take the stance that none of this is happening. All of this talk about whether it's war crimes or food insecurity, grain shortages caused by Putin's war in Ukraine, that's a confection of the West. That's not real. That ability to do that and say that and have people believe them seems like a new development. Or do you think the practice of misinformation may be through different channels, but ultimately is the same as it was?
Well, I'd say that there's, you know, various countries, especially those involved in conflict, have a history of misinformation. What's different is the hundreds of millions of dollars the Russians are investing in media penetration around the world. And having traveled, for example, to Kenya, to Somalia, to Zambia, to Malawi, to Sri Lanka, to Pakistan, just in the last couple of months, I've seen, again, the information overload by the Russian Federation through RT and Sputnik and these other media, but I don't really get the sense that many people are buying it. Now, one piece of evidence came early in the conflict. Getting 141 votes to condemn the Russian invasion at the United Nations may not sound like a lot. There are 193 countries in the UN, but I know firsthand from working there, most countries want to duck when a hard vote comes up. 141 countries stuck their heads up, even though there was coercion and intimidation, harassment, you know, claims that resources were going to be cut off. They still took that stand. And many countries who abstained and did want to stay on the sidelines of the vote, didn't want to antagonize Putin of all people, you talk to them privately and they're horrified. Because every country has an interest in territorial integrity being sacred, and in one country not lopping off part of a neighbor militarily. And as quaint as that can sound in an era where Putin is seeking to do just that, I do think it explains even the recent statements by Prime Minister Modi, by President Xi and others. There's a lot of discomfort even among those countries that are, you know, whose publics are imbibing Russian misinformation, as is occurring, of course, in China. But still the leaders have a sense that there's something awful and massively destabilizing that one country has done to another, and thus to the international system.
The fact that Xi and Modi are speaking out in their way about this is significant. I have 1,000 other questions to ask you, but we don't have time for them. I want to know. I want you to come back so that we could talk about Pakistan and climate change and how up to the job our aid systems are in terms of the crises we face as a globe. I know that you're in town for the UN General Assembly. We thank you for taking some time out of your very busy and important schedule to share your thoughts with us. Thanks for your time.
Great to be with you,
always.
Alex.